and welcome to my channel. Today's tragic tale takes place in Westerlo, New York, which is located near the New York state capital of Albany. It is near the Helderberg Mountains, but since the victim in this story only lived there for 9 months, I am going to talk about where he spent most of his life, which was Commack, New York. Commack is a hamlet in Suffolk County, New York. It's located in the towns of Huntington and Smithtown on Long Island. It is a hamlet because it doesn't have its own government and relies on the two towns for its police and fire protection, among other services. The residential areas are filled with tree-lined streets, and Commack is surrounded by ponds and nature preserves. Commack does have a retail shopping district, but no downtown area like most towns. This story is about 22-year-old Gabe Philby-Zetzsche, who went by Gabe, so that's what I'll call him. Gabe was born prematurely on March 7, 1990. He had a twin sister who died shortly after birth from complications. Gabe weighed 1 pound, 9 ounces. He spent 102 days in neonatal intensive care, being hooked up to heart monitors, a breathing tube, and after multiple surgeries, he was able to go home. Gabe grew up in his mother's childhood home in Commack. His mother and father had divorced the year after Gabe was born. Gabe graduated from Commack High School in 2009. After high school, Gabe attended a trade school called Wilson Tech in nearby Dix Hills and learned how to run a printing press. Gabe had a mild case of cerebral palsy and a deformed right arm, but that didn't stop him from trying to live as normal a life as possible. He had many friends and was very active and social with those friends. Gabe still lived with his mother, Tracy, because he was prone to having seizures. In October of 2011, Gabe and Tracy moved from Commack to Westerlo. Westerlo was over 170 miles north of Commack. Tracy's brother and sister-in-law lived on a lake in Westerlo. Tracy and Gabe moved into an apartment above P&L Deli, which was 5 minutes down the road from Tracy's brother's house. Tracy had trouble keeping a job, and the landlord said she struggled to pay rent shortly after moving in, but it had become increasingly worse within the last 3 to 4 months. Tracy had a cleaning job at Hollow Brook Inn and a restaurant in Greenville, which was a 13-minute drive. She would bring Gabe to help her clean sometimes. At some point, she lost that job and was behind on other bills in addition to the rent. She was not receiving any assistance for Gabe's disability from the state. Tracy tried making incremental payments to her landlord, who was the owner of the deli, but kept coming up short. The landlord had no choice but to evict Tracy and Gabe. The landlord said that Tracy was to start moving earlier in the month, so the landlord placed an ad to rent the apartment. Each time the landlord would ask Tracy how the move was coming, she would say the moving truck is coming this weekend, or the truck was broke down. The two were supposed to be out of the apartment by July 31st, 2012. The plan was to move back to Commack. Around 8:30 a.m. on the morning of July 30th, 2012, just 1 day before Tracy and Gabe were to move, Gabe's aunt, Tracy's sister-in-law, was driving by and spotted Tracy sitting on the back steps leading to the apartment, looking very distraught. Tracy was wrapped in a blanket and rocking back and forth. The aunt stopped to ask Tracy what was wrong, and Tracy told her something was wrong with Gabe and that she thinks he's dead because there's blood everywhere and she doesn't know what happened. She told her sister-in-law not to go upstairs. The aunt called 911 and reported that her nephew was dead in an apartment above P&L Deli. If you Google this, multiple accounts say the aunt went upstairs and found the body. That is not true, according to the 911 transcript. The aunt was relaying what Tracy was telling her to the 911 operator. The 911 operator wanted the aunt to check to see if he was breathing and asked multiple times, and each time the aunt would say she would go check, Tracy would tell her not to and that he was definitely dead, so the aunt never did go upstairs. The police arrived on the scene at approximately 9 a.m. Tracy was not answering questions. She was removed from the scene by police and taken to the police station. She wasn't giving any information. No charges were initially filed. She asked for a public defender. Police processed the scene until 9 p.m. in the evening and were questioning at least 3 other people who were not named. 3 knives and a hammer were found wrapped in bed sheets in a dumpster behind the deli. There were also bloody towels and clothing found. A crime scene investigator wearing protective white clothing walked down the road to a nearby vacant former gas station and store and took pictures of something lying on the ground there and collected it as evidence. Police now would say what it was. This was the only mention of this. In the aftermath, all items related to the crime were in the dumpster behind the deli. July 31, 2012. Tracy was formally charged with second-degree murder and was being held without bond. Gabe's autopsy was also completed that day, and it was revealed he had been stabbed more than 20 times in the chest and had more than 20 blows to the head. It was violent, vicious, and overkill. August 9, 2012. Gabe's viewing took place at Shalom Memorial Chapel in Smithtown, New York, which was one of the 2 Comac towns. August 10, 2012. Gabe's memorial service took place in Kings Park, New York, which is on Long Island and close to Comac. A private burial service took place after the service. October 3, 2012. Tracy pled not guilty to murder. After this, she would undergo psychiatric evaluation and would not appear in court again until September of 2013. September 2013. The judge allowed Tracy to enter an Alford plea to first-degree manslaughter. This means she was not admitting guilt because she didn't remember committing the crime, but that there was enough evidence against her that if she were to stand trial, she would be convicted of second-degree murder. The judge asked Tracy what the last thing is she remembered, and she told him watching the Yankees game on July 22, 2012. The prosecution argued that she attempted to clean up the scene, opened windows and had fans blowing outwards, hid evidence, and stayed in the apartment several days after her son died. Before we get to whether or not Tracy's plea deal was accepted, we have to go back to the days leading up to the attack on her son. Tracy had gotten boxes to start packing sometime in July. As stated previously, whenever the landlord would ask when she would be moving, there was always some excuse. The landlord stated that Gabe had come down to the deli one day not too long before his death, and when the landlord asked how the packing was coming, Gabe had no idea what he was talking about.
July 26, 2012. Gabe was active on social media that day. He didn't post every day, but that particular day he was posting, and the content was just like any other time he posted. He was very articulate in his posts. He posted about sports, nature, and inspirational posts. These were a couple of his posts from that day. His last post was at 9:30 p.m. according to investigators. This was his last post. Earlier in the day, on July 26th, the landlord had received a deposit from some renters interested in the apartment, and they wanted to see the apartment. Tracy opened the door just enough to squeeze her head through the door to say the place was a mess due to the packing and asked if they would come back later. Now, some have speculated that Gabe was already dead. However, I don't think that was the case. The investigators didn't think it was either, because again, Gabe had posted at 9:30 p.m. that evening. The landlord suspected the mother didn't want Gabe to know they were moving. I agree with that. I think the reason she stuck her head out was so Gabe couldn't hear what was being said. No one will ever truly know for sure unless Tracy makes a full confession, but she was claiming amnesia. Investigators said Tracy had cuts to her hands, bruising on her arms, and also a bruise to her head. This led people to speculate that maybe Gabe had attacked Tracy. I don't believe that for 1 minute. If you go to his Facebook page, which is now a memorial page, you will see for yourself this would not be in his character. I will also share some memories, as I always do at the end. The investigators said those cuts were consistent with someone cutting themselves by slippage during the attack. The bruise to her head was consistent with her accidentally striking herself during the attack, not intentionally. Nothing was said as far as the bruises to her arms. My opinion is it may have been Gabe trying to fend her off, but again, that's just my opinion. Besides the evidence that was collected at the crime scene and the state of the apartment, police did say there were boxes in the apartment. They didn't say if those boxes were filled or not. Also, the daughter-in-law to the owner of the deli had been working on the 26th and said she heard a loud thud coming from the apartment that sounded like a weight had been dropped. There was no time disclosed as to when she heard this or if it had anything to do with Gabe's murder. I live in a 2-story home, and when my husband drops something on the floor upstairs, it sounds loud too. The deli was open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., Thursday through Saturday, and July 26th was a Thursday. Gabe last posted at 9:30 p.m. I suppose it could have been Tracy posing as Gabe online, but that is a stretch, but not impossible. Again, the daughter-in-law did not specify a time, and just because they closed at 8 p.m. doesn't mean there weren't lingering customers. Of course, there would have been cleanup and most likely balancing of the cash register. So yeah, she could have been there later in the evening. From what I can tell, no one heard screams or a struggle, and no one smelled decay. The police on the scene have only stated that the body was lying in a pool of blood in the bedroom, and there was spatter on the walls and ceiling, not that the body was decomposed. It has been said Gabe's death occurred on July 26th, but I guess no one knows for sure. Obviously, the body had been there before the 30th when it was discovered, but there are no official published reports as to what the coroner's findings were for a possible date. Nothing about decomp published, so it really is unknown if the murder occurred on July 26th. But the papers and news outlets report that as being the date. At least one news article did not jump on the speculation bandwagon. They said it was sometime between the 26th and the 30th. I have to believe it was closer to the 30th. It was July, and on the East Coast it is hot in the summer. I found the weather forecast for the week before and the week after, and it was in the 80s. A body laying there for 4 to 5 days would smell, and no one in the deli reported an odor. There was no central air in the deli or the apartment, no leakage through the floorboards, which would tend to happen over time. July 29th was a Sunday, and the deli closed by 4 p.m. on that day. Remember, Gabe didn't post on Facebook every day, so it is possible it was closer to the 30th. Regardless of when it happened, it shouldn't have happened, and no one truly knows why it happened. Tracy herself doesn't even know why it happened. Family and former Comac neighbors said she and Gabe were very close, and she did everything for him. Tracy's brother said after their father died, Tracy did rebel, but once she found out she was pregnant, she was excited and loved Gabe from the moment he was born and considered him a gift from God. The owners of the deli also described them as very close and never saw them argue. Tracy's manager at Hollowbrook Inn echoed what everyone else said, that mother and son were very close. November 1st, 2013, the judge sentenced Tracy to 20 years to life in prison. At her sentencing, she cried out about how much she loved and missed her son, and that she was his biggest cheerleader, and that she would take any punishment handed down to her. The one-bedroom apartment above the deli did eventually get rented out. The deli remained in business until December of 2021. A post on December 10, 2021, by the owners said they would be closed for renovations and plan to reopen in May of 2022. However, that never happened. In fact, it had been listed for sale since June of 2021 for $289,000. The listing expired in June of 2022, and at some point before 2024 it was relisted. It sold on February 22nd, 2024 for $201,000. Whoever bought it didn't keep it and suffered a significant loss because on April 3rd, 2024 it was relisted again for $69,900. From what I can see in the listing, the deli had a lot of damage to the floor. The apartment, although outdated, seemed to be in solid shape. The building finally sold again on October 15, 2024 for $60,000. As far as Gabe, he was very beloved. He definitely touched people's lives. His Facebook is still receiving posts from those who loved him 12 years later. I could spend another hour recounting everything I have read about how people felt about him, but I'm only going to highlight some of it. He was a huge New York Yankees and New York Knicks fan. He bowled on a league for 6 years and managed the team. A friend who grew up next to him remembered playing basketball with him. This kid just would not let his disability keep him down. One of his friends was inspired by Gabe to open his own clothing line called Dopest. When the friend opened the store on Long Island in May of 2012, he said Gabe was one of his biggest supporters. Gabe called himself King at Dopest and changed his Facebook banner to help promote his friend's clothing line. Gabe was described as having a huge heart, always smiling and trying to make people laugh. All throughout school, everyone was friends with Gabe. He was remembered for giving high fives, being positive, and most considered themselves lucky to be his friend. He definitely made an impact on people's lives. May his sweet soul be resting in peace. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you on the next video.